Sometimes a story about a major automaker seems like a huge win for American manufacturing. But what if that win was actually a warning sign in disguise? This is the story of Stellantis, where one factory's trip across a border reveals a fascinating clash between two very different ideas of what economic strength really looks like.
It all kicked off with headlines that sounded great, right? Jobs are coming home. But the real story here wasn't about a company expanding with confidence. No, this was about a company retreating out of fear, and in the process, exposing a pretty deep economic trap.
So here's what went down. Stellantis, the giant that owns Jeep and Chrysler, announces it's moving production of its Jeep Compass. It's going from Brampton, Ontario, down to Belvidere, Illinois. And on the surface, yeah, it looked like a classic America First victory.
But you gotta look at why they moved. That's the key. This wasn't about building something new to meet more demand. Stellantis was literally running from a new 25% import tariff that suddenly made building in Canada way too expensive. So while Washington was celebrating, 3,000 Canadian workers were wondering what was next, and a lot of analysts were already raising red flags.
And this quote, it just perfectly captures the political spin, right? The move was sold as proof that these new tough policies were working, that they were forcing jobs back onto U.S. soil. It's a powerful message, for sure, but it completely papered over the chaos that was brewing just beneath the surface.
But that so-called victory, well, it came at a staggering price. Almost overnight, Stellantis found itself stuck between a political talking point and a really brutal financial reality.
And this number is the trigger, 25%. A new tariff on imported vehicles that just created total panic. See, Stellantis had spent decades building this hyper-efficient supply chain that zigzagged all over North America. And overnight, that strength became a massive weakness.
And the financial hit? It was immediate, and it was brutal. We're talking higher costs, bottlenecks at customs, endless paperwork. It just hammered the company's finances. In just the first half of the year, Stellantis posted a staggering net loss of nearly $2.7 billion. The problems weren't just on the balance sheet either. They were on the factory floor. Strict Buy American rules basically shattered the company's supply chain. Production efficiency at the U.S. plant just plummeted to 52% capacity. You had thousands of unfinished vehicles just sitting in lots waiting for parts that were stuck in bureaucratic limbo.
So while the politicians are out there declaring victory, the markets, well, they saw the truth. And this sharp take from an analyst at Jefferies says it all. Investors knew this wasn't growth. It was just moving losses around. The company wasn't winning, it was just paying the price of protectionism inside its own borders. But here is where the story gets really interesting. While the US was celebrating this chaotic and super costly win, Canada's reaction was the total opposite. They didn't get mad. They didn't retaliate. They got strategic.
And this comparison right here, it gets to the absolute core of the difference. The US used the blunt force of tariffs, a threat, basically. Canada, on the other hand, relied on something way more powerful in today's economy, legally binding contracts. They knew that real power doesn't come from shouting the loudest, it comes from having it all in writing.
You see, Canada's approach was just incredibly methodical. Ottawa didn't panic. First, they calmly reminded Stellantis of the billions in support it had already accepted for EV infrastructure, money that, came with strings attached. Then, they brought up the legal clauses that made it more expensive to leave than to stay. And this is crucial, they immediately started focusing on the future, retraining workers, and pushing forward with a massive new EV battery plant.
This quote from a direct letter sent to Stellantis executives is just ice, cold, and effective. It's not a political slogan, it's a legal warning. Canada wasn't asking or pleading. It was just stating the contractual reality. You're locked into our industrial ecosystem, and that was by design, not by chance.
So what was the end result of these two totally different strategies? Let's do a direct comparison of what happened in Belvidere, USA, and what happened just across the border in Windsor and Brampton, Canada. The contrast? Well, it's pretty stark.
The difference is really telling. The U.S. win ended up costing Stellantis an extra $3.3 billion and left a factory running at half capacity, with workers stuck in unpaid waiting periods. Meanwhile, Canada turned its loss into a strategic pivot. They retrained their workers, retooled their factories for the future of EVs, and pulled in over $1 billion in new regional investment.
And this number is a real testament to Canada's strategy. By the end of 2025, more than 2,000 of those displaced workers from the Brampton plant had been retrained and moved into Windsor's growing electric vehicle ecosystem. They turned a potential crisis into a long-term solution for their workforce.
What's amazing is how resilient the regional economy was. Despite all this disruption, Ontario's unemployment rate held steady at 5.6%. And get this, their auto parts exports to the EU actually grew by 18%. This wasn't an economy in crisis, it was an economy that was adapting and actually thriving.
So, let's zoom out. What's the bigger lesson here? Because this story is about way more than just one company. It's about the fundamental illusion of protectionism and what policies like tariffs really show us about an economy's health.
And here's the key insight. Tariffs don't really build strength. More often than not, they build a wall to hide the fragility behind it. They force companies to make decisions based on survival, like Stellantis did, not on innovation. It looks strong from a podium, but it feels chaotic on the factory floor.
And that's really the core difference, isn't it? The U.S. chased the short-term optics of getting one factory to come home. In that same time, Canada was quietly making multiple strategic plays, securing EV partnerships, locking down mineral supply contracts, retraining its workforce, moves that are going to pay off for decades. One country was chasing headlines, the other was building endurance.
This quote from economist Richard Wolff just nails it. The American system celebrated a move of pure desperation, a company just trying to survive a tariff, and called it a success. And according to Wolff, that very confusion, that's a dangerous sign of a deeper economic decline.
So in the end, the Stellantis paradox teaches a really powerful lesson. Real economic power today isn't about imposing your will with brute force. It's about building a stable, predictable, and resilient system through smart, long-term strategy. Canada's quiet approach simply outmaneuvered America's loud one.
And that leaves us with one final question. As the global economy keeps shifting, will the U.S. learn from this and start building smarter by investing in that long-term resilience, or will it just keep doubling down on the illusion of strength? The answer to that is going to define its economic future.